This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Morning. Just heading back from the nursery run now. Horrific weather, under an umbrella. Trousers absolutely soaked. Anyway, 'tis the season. Yeah, nothing like a rough start to the day. But last night I watched the 2000 film Final Destination. This is now 2024, October. So it's been, I guess, 24 years since it came out. The only other time I've seen it was when it came out. I saw it in the cinema. And just sort of like retracing my steps there and thinking about what age I would have been. I think I would have been 15, give or take. I think being 15, watching Final Destination in the cinema is like, you can't really get a better viewing of Final Destination than that. It's that kind of movie where it's not really scary. It's more like shriek-tastic, to coin a phrase. And yeah, watching it now, it actually held up pretty well, to be fair. It's not an A-list cast, but it is a cast full of familiar faces to like someone who was a teenager around that time. You got Kerr Smith from Dawson's Creek. You got Ali Larter from Varsity Blues. You got Devon Sawa, whatever his name is, who's kind of just here, there, and everywhere. Obviously, Stan in the Eminem music video. And yeah, I'm just sort of standing to the side now, waiting for an opportunity to walk past a giant puddle so that cars don't splash me. Here we go. I think I got one now. Yeah, so it's a bit of a it's a very much a throwback. Funnily enough, it doesn't really have much in the way of a 2000 soundtrack in terms of licensed music. That's often another one of the elements that really transports you back with all of the like pop punk and stuff like that. But maybe they hadn't quite solidified that. This is a few months after American Pie, less than a year. And stars Sean William Scott as well. I was wondering whether American Pie would have come out by the time he was cast. I'm guessing no. So it is like he was a star when the film was released, but he wasn't a star when the film was being made, or they might have capitalized on it a little bit more. But yeah, it's very much a film of our generation of teenagers. I would say that the stuff that I remember working about it still works about it. And the fact that I remember it being just that bit less magnetic than the likes of Scream or I Know You Did Last Summer. She got a bit less of that kind of sex appeal, that like real perfectly honed teen movie experience. So yeah, that still holds true. Of course, I'm not a teenager. I'm less equipped to appraise that, but I think Kevin Williamson just had like that edge when it came to dialogue, and his movies always had lots of like cool music and stuff like that. This one's a little bit, it feels like a bunch of not TV filmmakers, but sort of not the absolute creme de la creme of filmmakers stumbled upon an incredible concept. I think the concept and the fact that it's delivered upon is what makes this film amazing. Obviously, famously, it's a film where the main cast members, quote unquote, cheat death. They should have been in a plane crash, but Darren Sawa sees it in a premonition, and so about 6 characters are saved from death. And then you can't cheat death, as Tony Todd tells us, although that's actually not a direct quote from the movie. I was waiting for him to sort of say that line, but he never actually says it. But yeah, death is coming for you, and it's going to pick you off one by one, by hook or by crook. So you get these sort of Rube Goldberg type of scenes where, is this going to happen? No, is this going to happen? And it's actually something that I didn't think would still work as well as it does now. I think there was a sort of joy of discovery back when the film came out. It was one of the only horror films ever released, really, that has an original concept, an original gimmick. And there's really only about like 20 things that horror movies are doing, and this is, it managed to come up with a new one and take full advantage of it. So you kind of get the ultimate death, but then you get all of the suggested deaths that never happen. Case in point being when Todd is trimming his nose hairs, which of course every teenage boy does. We see this slippery liquid working its way up towards his foot, and we're in our heads, we're treated to the death of him slipping and the scissors going up into his brain, but we don't get that. So we get a lot more gore and death in our brain than we actually get on screen. And what we get on screen is also pretty gory for a movie that's clearly aimed at teenagers and is, I would imagine, not the highest certificate. I mean, it's obviously with it being released to American audiences first, and I'm sure that's the certification that they would have been targeting. Nowadays, obviously, if it came out, it would be in America PG-13, because it's 24 years old. Probably, maybe got higher. Would it have gotten R rating? I'm not sure, but I think probably not, because it actually holds off on most of the gore. I think probably the goriest thing we see is Sean William Scott's dismembered body falling to his knees. But most of it is just like, we see the blood splattering on other things and stuff like that. So it's fairly tame, but it does a really good job of making you squirm in anticipation. And yeah, I think even by the end of the movie, when we go into, maybe the 5th or 6th variation on this mechanic that they have of what's going to happen. Oh, it didn't happen. It did happen. It didn't happen. You don't really get any fatigue from that. It's still entertaining. It's still very well done. From a filmmaking standpoint, I think it is the thing that's best done in this movie. I have only seen the original Final Destination, I think, and then I've seen clips from other, much like this film, they all kind of start with some sort of disaster. So those disaster scenes, whether it's a roller coaster or a motorway pileup, they all became quite talked about, because it was like, well, it's kind of like Mission Impossible. It's like, how's he going to top it this time? That stunt or whatever ends up having a life of its own beyond the film. So I've been privy to a bit of that, but by and large, this film is the only exposure I've had to the franchise. So now that I've revisited it, I probably will start chipping away at the franchise. It was interesting that until this point, it's one of the only long-running, by long-running I mean number of titles, long-running horror franchises that all happened in a row. It's not like there's 10-year gaps and then reboots and then, legacy sequels. And retconning and all. It's just like, no, they made a movie, 3 years later, they made a movie, 3 years later, they made a movie, 2 years later, made a movie. Like, it all comes out in a row, except for the 2025 release, which we'll be seeing next year. When I say we'll be seeing it, I think I'll probably only watch it if I've caught up on the other films. Not because I feel like there's a narrative need to do so, but because as much as I have a fondness for Final Destination, it's not like I have a fondness for the franchise. I've literally only seen the original one. But yeah, I'm curious to see how many films I can watch before I lose that sense of magic about the way that people die in these movies, the whole conceit of it. I'm also interested to see if every film is identical in its plot, or if they ultimately have to add a bit more lore to the whole death thing, or to Tony Todd's character. I'm not sure if he reoccurs. Feels like he would be the one character from this movie you'd expect to see in sequels. The opening, like, tragedy or whatever in this scene, or this movie, the airplane crash, is fun to revisit now. When I watched it in the cinema, I remember thinking, like, this is like as high fidelity as you could possibly get from an airplane crash. Like, this is amazing to watch. Just it's real. Like, it literally looks real. Watching it now, I can see a lot of the cheapness. I can see how much of it is them shaking the camera and stuff like that. That said, there's still loads of really good stuff in that plane crash. Lots of really nice details, like a stereo just tumbling down through the cockpit and hitting somewhere in the head. Is it called the cockpit? The main bit of the plane, whatever that's called. The not cockpit. And yeah, just like the carnage of bits of wall being ripped away and how long they hold on that final shot of him being burnt alive. It's actually, like, still quite affecting. And what I'll say about this film is it's not a masterpiece, but also not a film that's really been hurt by the passage of time. You know, it's not, I kind of would expect it's sort of a lesser, it's not going to be in the top 2, maybe 3 movies you reference from the sort of late 90s, early 2000s horror boom. Well, it probably is for some people, because I think the franchise clearly must have had a lot of fans to keep going as long as it did. Maybe it helped that they didn't need to get any cast members back and they could spend fuck all money on every installment. But yeah, it's for me, it's a lesser, like, I if I'm thinking about that era of horror, or I'm just thinking about horror in general, it doesn't come to mind as like one of the most iconic movies, but it actually holds up really well. It's not that dated, and I think the thing that really gets dated in horror movies in a bad way often is the scares, because the relationship stuff, the music, the fashion, all that almost gets dated in a charming way. You know, you watch an older movie, whether it's from the 40s or from the 90s, it kind of, yes, it's incredibly dated, but that's almost adding to the film. But then when you get to the scares, it's like, well, that being dated actually is taking away from what this film should be giving me, because it should be scary and it's not scary. And this film, I don't think it was ever that scary. It's more of a exciting film than a scary film, but or like a thrilling film and a kind of interesting, how's he going to solve it type thing. But in terms of sort of fear factor and intensity of those moments, for me, it works as well as it did back then. Now, the ultimate litmus test will be showing it to a teenager now. Show it to someone who's 15 right now, and they might completely dismiss it out of hand. I was talking about this with my wife the other day. I was like, our daughter now, when she gets to 8 years old, or if we show her Home Alone, will that be just like showing her like Little Rascals or some like old black and white thing that she's like, what the fuck is this? Because when I watched Home Alone, and I guess I was about 8 years old, so in the cinema, it was like giving me cocaine or something. It was just like, holy shit, this is just like, I can't believe that watching a film can be this exhilarating. And so now if I think about Home Alone, I was like, it's timeless. Of course, show that to any kid, show it a kid in 100 years. It would be the exact same experience that I had. But, I think it doesn't really work like that. So yeah, I was pleased to see how well this film held up. I like all the archetypes. I like, they got the jock and they got the cheerleader girls and they got the kind of nerdy characters, and it's all here. It's usual. It's in most ways really formulaic, and I think that kind of works nicely where you've got a really, really original idea, a really original element that's just a brilliant idea. Then you execute on that idea incredibly well, and then you surround that with really comfortable formulaic ingredients. You end up with a strong film, and yeah, one that I'm pleased to see is still kind of hanging in there, serving or holding up to the test of time. So yeah, good revisit. Not sure if you're up for a revisit on it, but I think you've probably seen it a good few times. So if you're interested in kind of like doing a quick skim of it and seeing what you think, would be interesting to hear how you continue to live with the movie. Because for me, I have only seen it that one time in the cinema, and now I'm going back, and of course loads of it I remember. But yeah, if you've been kind of checking in with it here and there throughout the intervening 24 years, it'd be interesting to see how it's held up over the years for you.
Hey man, yeah, it's funny. In the space of 5 minutes, I went from sending you a text message and saying, no, I ain't gonna talk about this movie. I haven't got much to say about this movie. I know it too well. I'm not gonna rewatch it. Yeah, it's just not worth having the conversation. And then after actually listening to your voice note there, just quite a few things come flooding back. So I don't know how many times I've seen this movie. I don't really know when's the last time I've seen this movie. I feel like if I was to hazard a guess, I've seen it twice, but maybe even once. Now, what I have done is certainly seen a lot of the Final Destination franchise. I don't know how many they are, but I've seen at least up until 3, maybe 4. And the fact that you're continuing to watch them, I'll be able to talk about them, but I wouldn't go into spoilers. If you can't have a spoiler in a Final Destination movie, I won't go into them as thoroughly as I normally would. And even though I've probably seen Final Destination twice, the thoughts I remember of it are definitely from the first time I've seen it. So I just thought it'd be interesting to give you thoughts from a 15-year-old me's headspace, which I can remember quite well. And maybe it's a good thing in a way I've not rewatched the movie, because we have your perspective of that, someone who's 38, 39. Going back, I'm still attached to that brain and mindset of the time when I talk about it now. So I think there's a good conversation to be had. So what I remember quite vividly about the movie was the introduction to, not to say the concept of death, because I was aware you could die, but there was something about teenagers and me being the same age and how that is portrayed in this movie that was quite scary and quite affecting to me. And maybe it definitely contributed to my fear of flying, which, as you know, I certainly have. I get or I used to get a bus from London to Ireland, which takes 17 hours, when a flight could just take me 1 hour. I'm not saying this movie is directly the cause of it, but certainly I had it in my mind every time I'm flying for a good few years after seeing the movie. And what it does, or what it did for me at the time, was it managed to do things twofold. At the one stage, it's almost like there is no antagonist in this movie. There is no Mike Myers. There is no, I don't know why Terminator's coming to my head, but I guess the first movie is a horror movie. There is no character as a bad guy per se. So on one level, it makes you constantly aware that you can die at any time from the most inconsequential, banal ways. You mentioned the guy when he's doing the nose trimmer and things like that. Obviously, there's a lot of insane moments as well. I think it's Sean William Scott that gets his head chopped off at the train line. That might just be a different movie. But it does constantly make you aware that death can get you at any time. And as a teenager, that was terrifying to me. Not so much as that a final destination version of death that can get me, but it certainly gets into your head. Stop fucking fighting. These cats fucking getting riled up at the talk of this death. Will you stop fighting with each other? Yeah, so it is, at the time as a teenager, a psychological warfare, because I remember thinking, or at least from my particular mind, was, well, I could just be chopping potatoes in the kitchen. Not that I ever did that. But I could cut my arm by mistake and bleed out. I could just be walking down the stairs and fall over and break my neck. So it does set up that in your mind at maybe a time where you wouldn't really think about it, because it is through the frame of these teenagers cheating death. And that was really unnerving and really terrifying for me. Now, if I went back and watched it, maybe it wouldn't be because it's like, now it's like, can cancer get you in any time? It's like, unless you're a Final Destination movie where the bad guy's cancer following you around, like, you've got different worries at the age that I am now than back then. So a gory death out of nowhere was certainly something I hadn't thought about at that age, but this movie drilled into my mind. So I think there was certainly a lot more of a psychological aspect of it that maybe might be missing now because of at the age I was when I seen it. And the other thing is, just getting back to the horror movie bad guy, is that it works really well in that type of framework as well. Because if you think about Mike Myers, if you think about Ghostface, it's always, where is he now? Where are they going to pop out from? And there's a certain type of horror beat that you're used to, where, okay, the killer has to go through here, you have to run, there's a bit of silence. You might pop out from a closet, you might have to hide in a closet. And there's a physical manifestation of what you're running away from. Whereas in this, the horror antagonist can come from anywhere and get you anytime. So it frees up a lot of creativity, and it frees up a lot of different set pieces that you wouldn't normally get. And of course, it frees up a lot of non-horror set pieces. I think towards the end of this movie, did they go to France or something? And I remember a vivid image at the end where they're docking past someone that swings from a street and then Kurt Smith avoids it and then it's his turn again, something like that. So it does set up a lot of action movie-esque set pieces as well, from what I remember, and especially the plane crash as well. So it does free up a lot of play genre-wise. So even though it is a horror, even though it is a thriller, how Deck goes about taking out these people is inventive and original compared to what we were used to at the time, at the very least. And yeah, I remember liking the cast at the time of the teenagers, specifically Kurt Smith, because of the character he was playing in Dawson's Creek was quite soft and empathetic, and I remember him being the jock in this movie, and I thought he played it quite well, but that's probably more for you to answer now in 2024. And the other thing it does when it has all these archetypes, all these stock pile characters, the other thing that's enjoyable about that is when they work out that Death has a plan and who's next and the flight plan based on who's going to die next, it gives us a really cool dynamic and focus, because in a horror movie pretty much anyone can die except the final girl, historically speaking. Whereas in this, you might have your favorite character, you might have a different character that you don't like, and once they manage to dodge death, then the focus becomes, oh, you're next. And because the killing does follow quite an intricate structure, it just adds another layer to a horror movie that you're not particularly used to, because it almost takes away the dumbness, because characters often make dumb decisions, whereas in this, it's like, what can you do? You can be watering a pot of plants and you could slip in and choke to it on the dirt or something outlandish like that. So it kind of adds to the stupidity that normally happens in horror movies, but makes it not seem stupid, if that makes sense. And regarding the Final Destination franchise going forward, I remember, and if you've seen clips, there's an amazing sequence on the roadway with logs in Final Destination 2 that stands out. And the way it gets inventive, if you can call it that, is in the way that they cheat Death's plan, and they ultimately find different ways to resolve that going forward. Because in the first one, as I remember, it ends on a cliffhanger, literally, where you think Kurt Smith is going to be next after Ali Larter and Deva Sawa. Wherever they are anyway. I think they're in a foreign country, and I think Paris, but I might be wrong in that. It never ends, so the movie doesn't actually end. Right, it ends on quite a cliffhanger, because they haven't found a way to resolve, well, how do we stop this shit? Well, I remember quite well, which I won't spoil for you, in Final Destination 2 and in Final Destination 3, they come up with ways in which they don't have to end the movie on a cliffhanger by different ways that you can cheat Death's plan, which is, again, I haven't seen it in a long time, but pretty cool ways to get out of it, I guess. Although at the time I remember not liking it and thinking it was cheesy, but in my head now as I talk about it, I'm thinking, okay, from a writer's point of view, that is quite a good way to get out of the situation if you don't want it to end like the first Final Destination. And I think, yeah, just what you were saying about when you watch older movies, the stuff that's dated, like the clothes and everything like that, it almost adds to a period piece. It makes it like you're watching a period piece horror movie rather than something like It Follows, I think. Is that set during the 80s? Maybe not, but you know, when they try and make it look like the 80s, sometimes it's really cool when you're actually watching something from that time and everything looks so dated. It just adds to the aesthetic of it, I guess. And the other thing is as well, what you're saying about Home Alone, would it be dated? If anything, and I don't know the trends of film or kids movies by the time Tori gets to it, but if anything, Home Alone will be shocking to someone who is used to kids movies nowadays. It certainly won't be like The Little Rascals. It'll be much more like a Final Destination for kids. If you think of just the sheer brutality of what happens, Joe Pesci and can't remember the other guy's name right now, Dan something. What happens to them? They get flamethrowers to the head, they get their legs glassed up, and Joe Pesci is quite scary in the movie, so I think it would be the opposite, if anything. But as far as to answer your question with what would Final Destination feel like to teenagers nowadays, I don't know, maybe it'll lean more into the anxiety of worrying about death as a concept. Maybe they've already started worrying about that from fucking 5 years old these days, I don't know. But you can't discount that side of it, at least at the time as well. I don't know if you felt like that.
Yeah, true. I guess like it's the only horror film franchise that I can think of where literally death is the bad guy. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty where it's like the Grim Reaper, some sort of personification of death, but making it just be the actual, it's not even like a personification, it is just death as we understand it. And I think that's what I was thinking about as you were sending your voice message there, about how you were saying, oh, well, it could come and get you at any time. Like it could always get you. It's sort of unstoppable. It doesn't matter where you go. It's not like you can, I mean, we do see Devon Sawa at one point in a cabin where he's like duct taped everything to the walls and he's like tried to like death proof the place. But the idea is that like wherever you are, you could slip, you could, you know, something a tree could fall on the house, whatever. There's a whole lot of horror movies, thousands of them, where you're never safe because the thing that you're fighting, whether it's a ghost or a demon or something like that, doesn't obey rules that allow you to secure yourself in a safe position. So it could be that it goes through walls, it can teleport, it can manipulate you, or it can manipulate the laws of physics or whatever, to the extent that there's just no viable escape from it. And that's probably my least favorite trend in horror, is either no discernible rules, or the rules make the threat so overpowered that I just feel it's futile watching the characters run away from them or be scared from them. Like some of these movies, I'm like, well, if it can do that, wouldn't you just sit down in a chair and just like let it come and get you? Because there's literally no point running away from something that then can appear right in front of you. And it actually starts to get to the point with a lot of these movies where I'm like, why is it even toying with them? Like, why doesn't it just like click its fingers and you're defeated? But the difference between this movie and those movies is, although Final Destination is a supernatural film, the antagonist is something that I believe in, right? Non-spiritual people, or you know, sort of scientifically minded people all believe in death, right? Now, we might not believe in it in this way of like it's a system and you can cheat death, but it will come back and get you and all this kind of stuff. Of course, we don't believe in that. But it's asking us to take a tiny little step past something that we genuinely believe in. We might not believe in fate or destiny. We might not believe in it was just his time or whatever. But it's asking so little of us compared to ghosts and demons and stuff like that. So if you tell me that the all-powerful threat that's coming for people and that can come for them at any time is their death, then that bothers me way more than something I know nothing about, which is like some Japanese ghost monster thing that I'm like, what are the rules here? Like, I don't have a clue what we're doing here. This is laid out very simply. It's like, death, the way people die. Yeah, cool. Completely up to speed with you there. Well, what happens if someone gets a premonition and manages to avoid death, but then therefore this death is actually a codified thing that has to correct that error. And that is like just very easily understandable or intuited. So I like this film way more than this type of film where it can come and get you at any time. I'm generally a fan of horror movies where it's like either a human is ideal, like the human threat is by far away my favorite, but even if it's a monster like a werewolf or something, it's like I know what it can do, I know what it can't do, and therefore I always feel the stakes of a situation a lot more strongly. I agree that like this mechanic is able to sort of tee up a lot of different types of scene, from horror to action, suspense, stuff like that. You've seen evidently the sequels. I haven't, so don't want you to kind of answer this question, but I'm imagining that they explore action a lot more as it goes forward. There are actiony scenes in this. A lot of the scary death scenes are quite action packed, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see some installments of this like going even further into action territory. And you kind of can, that end scene, which indeed is in Paris with the big neon sign swinging down, is quite actiony. So is the train scene where Sean William Scott gets his head chopped off, and certainly the plane sequence as well. You're watching the type of material that tends to live more within an action film than in a horror movie. But there's also lots of more horror-y stuff, or just someone in their house, creepy music, walking around, stuff like that, which works pretty well. The thing that I'm a bit less sure on, I wouldn't say that I know that I dislike it, but I'm a bit less resolved on, is the system that they come up with. You referenced it there, of like, he works out that the route that the explosion was supposed to take through the plane, and therefore the order that they would have died in. And by doing so, he's able to work out the order that they're due to die, and that death will follow that route, if you will, and it will kill them off in that order. So he's able to go, well, let's put all of our emphasis on protecting this person because they're supposed to be next to get it. I like that. I think that's cool. Like, it's the film has very little opportunity to add logic or lore or a plot, really, other than just like people dying, and that's a really good idea. But they go a step further. Then they go, if you save someone and you break the order, then it goes on to the next person. But that's ultimately proven to not work, because, well, for starters, they broke the order of what order everyone in the world should die in the opening sequence, and then death's still coming for them. And then when they break the order again, it's like it loops back around, which we see in the final scene in Paris. And on the one hand, I don't mind that, because it's like, look, the main overriding thesis statement of the movie is you can't cheat death. So therefore, no matter what you do about breaking the order, yes, it will continue on to the next person, but then it will loop around back to you. You can't cheat death. Like, it is consistent in that regard. But then it makes the sort of the scrambling to break the order and stuff feel a bit more pointless and time wasting-y. So that's like, why does death? I mean, I'm not expecting to get this answer from the film, but it sort of feels a bit like, why does death let you sort of skip the order, but then it goes back and retraces its steps? It just feels a little bit too like a machine working on rules somehow. I don't know. There's something about that just maybe feels a little bit shallow and a bit kind of like almost fetch questy, where we're just creating something for the characters to do, but it's actually meaningless, which is not the worst thing in the world, but it's the one aspect of the film that I'm a bit less a fan of. But I think it is hard to think of things. The alternative would be that you can cheat death, right? But then that would go against the whole movie. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I like the casting of Kerr Smith. It's kind of stunt casting. Obviously, he was like super high profile at that time as a very soft and gentle character, and then casting him as the like horrible jock bully guy works really well. I think he plays it really well. He's probably happy to get like an opportunity to show that he can do other things, and yeah, it's just fun. I think that happened a lot back then, where you'd have like a girl where she's playing like the hot, sexy character in one movie, and then she's playing the kind of like introverted, nerdy character in the next movie. And it was always nice seeing that kind of stunt casting and toying with image, because image was obviously such a big part of that being like a teen star back then. And yeah, you do remember quite a lot of the film. I think it will be interesting as I continue to explore these movies to like get your thoughts on the sequels, which I'm expecting will be Law of Diminishing Returns. I'm almost thinking it's now I've watched this in my Halloween movies for 2024. The sequel, well, the latest sequel, the kind of, I don't know, it's a reboot or what it is going to be, but it comes out in 2025. So maybe I've got a year to watch all the films in preparation for the 2025 release, and then watch that in next Halloween's slate of movies. I was thinking as I was watching it, I was like, you know what they should have called the final one, when they made the last one in the franchise, they should have called that The Final Destination. So the first one's called Final Destination, and then they make like Final Destination 2, 3, 4, 5, and then when they go like, okay, we got one more in the tank, they call it The Final Destination. Then I went on Wikipedia and I noticed that like the third or fourth one is called The Final Destination, and then after that it's like again back to like 5, 6, 7. So they wasted that amazing title. I'm not sure what the next one's called. I think it might be called Final Destination again, which would be very the way they do these things. But if it is a complete reboot that just ignores like the whole rest of the franchise to date, then it will actually be a good further study on what we're talking about, of like whether the 2000 film Final Destination is ready for watching by contemporary teenagers, or if to sell this concept now, you have to change things up a bit. Although usually these reboots, like the Craft reboot, the Candyman, all these kind of 2020s horror reboots that they're doing of old movies, and by old I mean like, you know, 80s, 90s. I'm not talking about like The Invisible Man and stuff like that, but when they make these, like they did Hellraiser recently, they're making a lot of these reboots of films that were like popular horror films when we were kids, and now they're making them again now in the 2020s, and I can't think of a single one that's actually been a hit, like been a big moment for younger audiences. So they just don't see like, it'd be interesting to see if this one bucks the trend. But for the most part, this method of rebooting or like remaking, I suppose is a better word, remaking these old horror movies isn't working, because the Scream one is more of a reboot, but that's actually just a sequel. It's not even a reboot. And those Scream movies I think have been fairly popular. Scream as it's called, and Scream 6, I think they've been moderately popular, but they're just sequels, they're not remakes. But any time where they've tried to like go, look, people loved this horror movie back then, like I wouldn't be surprised to see a new Urban Legend come out. They did a new Wrong Turn. They did yeah, they've been really chucking out a lot of these like late 90s 2000s movies. So yeah, I wonder what they'll need to change. It's such a unique franchise, Final Destination, that maybe there isn't even that much that you need to change. You just need to like make it with new music, new fashion, new young people, I suppose. Oh yeah, another little tidbit for you that I found out on the internet after I watched the movie last night. The guy who wrote it as a spec script for the X-Files. So it was going to be an X-Files episode where someone manages to avoid death in the pre-credits scene. And then Mulder and Scully are obviously investigating, and they're just plagued with death. Exactly the same idea. And knowing that, I'm actually watching the X-Files at the moment. I'm in season 3 at the moment. This concept fits so neatly into an X-Files episode. I mean, it's like almost surprising that there isn't an X-Files episode that's this concept, because it's just such a perfect X-Files idea, and specifically for an episode rather than some like bigger arc. I think he wanted to get a TV screenwriting agent, so he wrote this on spec and submitted it, and then I think he actually worked for New Line Cinema, and he was like, oh, one of his friends at New Line convinced him to like try and like pitch it there, and it ended up going there. But yeah, interesting genesis. And also, apparently, this guy, when he was 14, wrote a script, sent it to New Line. They sent it back without reading it. So he then sent it to the guy who founded New Line Cinema, who no longer works there. And that guy responded, and they ended up having this big, long correspondence. And that, I guess, got him into the company. So yeah, nice little story there. This is like the bridge film, I guess, between the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, which made New Line what it was, and then the Lord of the Rings that would have come out just a couple of years later. It's like that kind of hit that they had in the middle between those two massive franchises that kept the company alive.
Yeah, what's crazy is as well is that as much as it does seem like a X-Files episode, a guy called James Wong was also brought on to help with the shooting script or help with the screenplay for film. And he actually worked on lots of X-Files episodes. So it is very much conceived in the X-Files universe without actually being part of it. And apparently the screenwriter, the story came to him after he read a story of somebody's mother telling them not get on a flight, and then she didn't, and the plane didn't crash. By the way, I can't believe that you're still on season 3 of the X-Files. I swear you started watching that at least since the summer. Things move slow at the old Marco residence. If I started it today, I'd probably be finished the whole series by tomorrow. Just what you're saying as well. Yeah, I don't like normally when there's an unstoppable force as well that is either a supernatural spirit or something like that can do anything, and you never really know why they're doing something. Whereas in this, which you kind of mentioned yourself and seemed unsure if it was a good thing or a bad thing, I think by following a set logic, it sidesteps that problem that we normally get where, oh, we don't know what it's going to do. Why can't it just kill him now? Why can't it just evaporate him into space like Dr. Manhattan did to Rorschach and Watchmen? Why can't it do those? The movie actually gives it a logic and gives it a something that we can grasp onto as the audience, which I think holds it together big time. The other thing is that I forgot to mention that maybe you'll be able to answer more than me, but from my recollection, since there's nothing actually on screen, I think the movie does a very good job of showing without actually physically showing death, things happening. Like you mentioned, the stuff happened where the guy trims his nose hairs, and just how they obviously every camera needs an object to focus as they show something to draw attention. And since we're never going to actually see death in this movie, I remember the camera work doing a very good job of filling space with something that isn't there and following movements of a type of logic in terms of things going wrong that really constantly grabbed your attention. And he mentioned you weren't quite sure about the manifestation of the rule that, oh, if it misses one person, it goes on to the next person. And he said that, oh, it felt like it might be a bit of a fetch quest. Well, let me tell you, if someone is just after abandoning the Witcher Tree, that is nothing like a fetch quest. But what I will say is, imagine a version of that movie without that rule, without that logic that ties it together. It'd be almost like, why aren't they getting this guy now? Why hasn't it got this guy? Why is it targeting this person? Why do people... Oi, stop! Fuck's sake! My cats are smacking the fuck out of each other today. Stop. And you would start to question a lot of things, and you'd actually lose focus. And especially when there is no manifestation of death on screen, you need manifestations of rules on screen. Otherwise, it's just going to be absolute chaos, to quote Jeff Goldblum. And the other thing that it does as well is, imagine a world without it in place where the movie wouldn't really last very long, because there'd be no respite and there'd be no characters, because they'd be all dead pretty quickly. So there's also a survival of the fittest element to it. So I'm a big fan of that rule. I think it's actually part of the genre itself at this stage, and it's certainly part of the Final Destination genre. But yeah, it would be interesting to see what you say with these remakes that come out. But it's not just a horror thing. It's like, if Terminator had its day, Alien had its day, although the latest Alien Romulus is quite good. Don't know if it did really well at the box office, but that is a version of an old property being made in a cool way for new audiences. Anything else is just trying to cash in on the old audience while finding a new audience. Like the Craft remake was abysmal. And that was crazily bad. I actually did witness it. So yeah, we'll see in 2025. I'll definitely watch it. I'll definitely be there for Spooktober 2025 if you want to add it to the list. Hell, it might even be out on October 31st. You can add it to the cinema, then I'll be there for it. Hey man, I know we initially had a discussion about Final Destination a while ago now, but I've managed to get in contact with the creator. I believe you mentioned him in the episode of the podcast as well. Jeffrey Reddick, and he's been kind enough to drop us a voice note and answer some of my questions. So fair play to him. I haven't listened to his answers yet, so I'll be going in as blind as you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you my voice note after this that I sent him, asking some questions, and then I'm going to put in his response, and let's see what he's done. I'm excited about this one. Hi Jeffrey, this is Andy from Cinema Callback here. Thanks very much for taking the time to answer these questions. It's probably me going to be waffling for the next 5 or 10 minutes, but I'll send you the transcript of the questions as well, just because you probably won't be able to remember everything I said. Firstly, As the creator of Final Destination, you laid the foundation for a franchise that has been expanded and reimagined by different writers and filmmakers over the years. What has that experience been like for you, seeing your original vision evolve through the hands of others? And on the flip side, when you had worked on Day of the Dead, you were in the position of adapting George Romero's iconic work. How did that experience compare? And what was your approach to honoring his legacy while bringing your own voice to the project? And another question I wanted to ask you is, the world and technology has changed significantly since the first Final Destination film. The the franchise is known for its creative and suspenseful death sequences, many of which were inspired by everyday situations. With all the advancements in technology and the way we live today, have you ever thought about new death scenarios that could reflect these modern changes? And how do you think the Final Destination would evolve in today's world? What else was I gonna ask you? Oh yeah. Um, Horror has evolved significantly since the release of Final Destination, with trends shifting towards psychological horror, elevated horror, and more character-driven narratives. Given how the genre has changed, if you were to write a new Final Destination movie today, would you approach it differently in terms of tone, structure, or even the way death itself is portrayed? Do you think audiences today expect something different from horror films compared to when the original Final Destination came out? Um, and you know, Final Destination has had a lasting impact on both horror and pop culture. People still talk about things like avoiding locked trucks on the highway because of these films. Over the years, have fans shared stories with you about how Final Destination changed the way they look at everyday situations? And are there any particular reactions or stories that have stuck with you, especially that were especially memorable or surprising, I suppose? And this is one I've always been curious about. Would you be interested in revisiting Final Destination in another format, like a TV series, a novel, or a video game? Um, I told you I'd be bombarding you with questions, so sorry about that. But I'm also a big X-Files fan back in the day, and my co-host is as well. And I read before Final Destination became a feature film, it originally started as a spec script for the X-Files, and the X-Files is known for blending procedural storytelling with supernatural and science fiction elements, and it often explored fate, death, and the unknown. When writing your spec script, how did you approach adapting your vision to fit within the X-Files universe? Were there specific aspects of the show, such as its tone, the Mulder and Scully dynamic, or its signature blend of skepticism and mystery that influenced your writing? And looking back, do you think Final Destination would have worked as an episode of the series, or did the concept always feel bigger than a single TV episode to you? Yeah, many thanks if you can answer these questions.
Hey there. Thank you so much for your questions and for supporting Final Destination. I'm very excited about the 25th anniversary coming up. So I am going to answer your questions. Regarding your first question, it was a very interesting process because I worked at the studio that produced the film. So, as you know, and we'll talk about it more later, I first came up with the concept of someone having a premonition and cheating death and getting people off a plane for an X-Files spec script. And I was using that just to get an agent. I never submitted it to the show. But one of my friends at New Line Cinema was like, this is a great idea for a feature. So I had worked there long enough and had written enough scripts that I'd submitted to the company that I knew that the idea of having death, as an entity killing people was going to be a hard sell. So I went to some producers, Craig Perry and Warren Zide, who worked at a production company. My friend Chris Bender started working for them, and they had a first look deal at New Line. So I knew for this particular project, since it wasn't a traditional kind of film with a traditional kind of killer, that I would need to kind of stack the deck in my favor. So I went to them, and we worked on the project for so long. Um, so many back and forths, developing it. Originally, the characters are going to start off as older. They weren't teenagers at the beginning. Let me start that over. At first, the characters were going to be adults because that's how it was in the spec script that I wrote. But then Scream came out, and we decided to make them teenagers. And our biggest argument with New Line really was not having death, like not having a physical manifestation of the killer. And we went back and forth with them for so long on that. And finally, before they bought it, they made me put like an angel of death in there. And the angel of death wasn't killing people. The original draft that I wrote for New Line Cinema was much more influenced by A Nightmare on Elm Street. So death played on their survivor's guilt in these very kind of fantasy, horror kind of scenarios until they committed suicides, which was pretty dark. And it was, when you ask about how it was to see it kind of expanded and reimagined by different writers and directors over the years, it's been a great experience. I mean, working at a studio, I've learned a long time ago to take my ego out of a process. And I remember when they were going out to directors, they'd approached a few, and they approached James Wong and Glenn Morgan who'd worked on some of my favorite shows on the X-Files and had done a lot of great stuff that I was a big fan of. So I was really excited to hear that they were going to kind of come on board and write the shooting script. And, they kept the basics, the same: Alex having the premonition, getting the people off the plane, Death coming after them, Alex figuring out what Death's design was and thinking he could cheat, maybe he could outsmart Death, and then forgetting, that he didn't switch plane seats with somebody and kind of getting the order mixed up. And, a lot of the character archetypes were there. But what James and Glenn did that I thought was brilliant with the shooting script that they wrote was they came up with this Rube Goldberg idea that death was kind of all around us and would use everyday things to get us. And I was really excited about that idea because I realized that would expand the franchise beyond just the horror audience, which I think, if you're doing something that's very Nightmare on Elm Street flavored, you're going to get people who just love horror films. And I think the brilliant thing that James and Glenn did was with the Rube Goldberg thing is they really expanded it, and made it something that a lot of people that watch it don't watch horror films. They're like, we don't watch horror films, but we love Final Destination. So I'm really grateful that they came on the project as writers, directors, and just very happy with how the film turned out. It was a word of mouth hit, and I had the pleasure of working with Eric Bress and J. Mackie Gruber on the story for the second film. So I had a good hand in developing the second film, kind of how expanding the mythology, bringing some of the original players back, and the structure of the second film as well. So that was part of the perks of working at the studio. Even on the first film, when James and Glenn were writing the shooting script, I was getting every draft as part of the development team and giving notes. And I only had a few notes, to be honest, like very, very minor notes, because, I know once a director comes on a project, it's their project. So again, you kind of just take your ego out of it. And if there's something that bumps you story wise, or if there's something that, that you feel could make it a little stronger, you might suggest it. But I try not to impose my will on a director once a director comes on board a project. But it's been great. James and Glenn came back for part 3. Eric Bress, who worked with me on the second one, did part 4. And then part 5 and 6, we've had a brand new team of people working on it. And they've been amazing. I've had the pleasure, I had the pleasure of getting to know David Ellis, Tony Todd, who we lost way too soon, Devin Sawa. I just become friends with most of the cast and crew on all the sequels, and the great thing I love about them is that they're fans of the film. So I'm just really, a long answer to your question, but just as a horror geek, I remember being 14 years old and watching A Nightmare on Elm Street, with my best friends and being like, I'm going to do this someday. I always knew I was going to work in the horror genre. So, 14-year-old me is still in there, just very excited that something that kind of sprang from my brain um, got a lot of amazing people involved, both in front of the cameras and behind the cameras and on the page and off the page, to turn it into something that's really become part of the public zeitgeist. So I just never imagined that. On the flip side, when I was working on Day of the Dead, um, that was honestly, that experience was challenging because I knew adapting something that George Romero had done or adapting anything was going to put us on the chopping block with fans immediately. But they already had Steve Miner directing the project, and they were just looking for writers. And I went in and I pitched a version that was very faithful to the original. The only parameters that we had were that we couldn't reference night or dawn, um, because it was because of legal reasons. It had to be like a standalone Day of the Dead remake. But I signed on, and if I write something crappy, I will be the first person to admit it. But I signed on um, with the take that was very faithful to the original. And that was a really tough process for me because they kept kind of making me take it further and further away from the original. Um, I know at one point they wanted me to have like the main characters be 13. And I'm like, they're running around with machine guns and machetes. It doesn't make it. They're like, yeah, but it's cool. We haven't seen it. I'm like, there's a reason we haven't seen it. So I fought the good fight on that one, but it just got to the point finally where I had to call my manager and like, I can't change this anymore. And, with time, I've learned to really find stuff to enjoy about everything that I've worked on. And I think if that movie was just called Zombie Attack, it's a really fun movie. It's just, I wish it wasn't the Day of the Dead remake because, how it started off and where it ended were two different places. And I think you see a lot of that in the film where there's like little homages or things that look like it's going to pay off later, that never do. And so, but the great thing about that film too is I got to make some really wonderful friends and I got to work with Steve Miner. So, you take the good, you take the bad, and that's the facts of life. Um, yes, technology has changed a lot. With in the world. And I will say, I haven't, after this second movie, I haven't really been like, you know, super creatively involved in the films. I'm just usually supportive of, my baby. But I'm really good friends with Craig Perry, and I always give him so much credit for being such a great shepherd of the franchise because he really respects it. He knows what the fans want. And, really kind of it's not so much technology going to the films is I know the mandate is to try to put people in situations that they normally would find themselves in and make them terrified to do it again. So if you've seen the teaser, if you haven't seen the teaser, cover your ears for 1 second. I'm not going to spoil anything, but it involves a tattoo parlor. So kind of the mandate with the films is to just find something new in today's world that people do, like LASIK eye surgery, and terrify them so they don't want to go in and do it anymore, which sounds awful, but that's part of the fun of the film. Um, Trends, yes, we've had a lot of changes. Um, if I were to write that question number 3 is always a tricky question because, you know, there's a formula to Final Destination that people love, and you don't necessarily want to mess with it. I know that there was at one point there was a pitch that a trailer was done for to kind of set Final Destination during the Game of Thrones times, which I thought would have been brilliant. But the studio is very concerned. They're like, well, people don't live there now. That's in the past. And what really gets people excited is, the possibility that something that they're doing today could actually be a Final Destination moment. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that fans would love to see death in all kinds of different scenarios. I think that's the magic of death. I know one idea that I got really excited about was involved a woman who escapes a serial killer because of a premonition. And then, she knows who the serial killer is, and death is going after the people he would have killed while the killer's coming after her. And I pitched that idea, and they were like, well, it's a little too off the beaten track. But I also found out that there's a writer in London, I think it's London, I'm blanking on his name, but there was a series of Final Destination books, and I know he used that idea for the book that never got published. So great minds think alike. But I would always like to take a chance and do something different with death, because I think death can have many designs and death can get you many ways. But it's kind of that studio thing where if it's not broke, you don't want to change it too much. Yeah. The Like I said, in answer to your question about pop culture, I mean, that's the thing that just makes me just very happy. Like, I'm so grateful. I'm grateful that New Line took a chance on a project with Death as a Killer. I'm glad that the fans have been it was a word of mouth hit, actually. Most horror movies open and then they drop like 50% the first weekend, and we were tracking the film during the week, and it was actually doing better every day. So we realized that word of mouth was like spreading, and that movie was in the top 10 longer than any movie that came out that month, including some blockbuster movies. It was crazy. So I'm just excited. For me, the geek in me is so happy. I get log truck memes, like, I'm not exaggerating, probably every other day, and people are like, I'm sure you're sick of this. And I'm like, no, I came up with that scene when I was driving home in Kentucky. And it just makes me excited that something that, again, came out of my brain is part of like an opening scene. I think it's probably, I never want to sound cocky. I would say it's probably in the top 10 opening scenes of a horror movie. Sometimes I'll say 15 because I don't want any of my friends getting pissed off who've done some great opening scenes. But the log truck especially, I'm very proud of that, because that came out of Craig Perry again, pushing me, because originally the opening was going to be a hotel fire. And he kept saying, we need something a little bit more exciting than that. And I was driving home to Kentucky and got behind one of the log trucks that is always on the Mountain Parkway in Kentucky. And then I pulled over to the next lane, and then I pulled off the highway, and I called him, and he's like, that's the opening. And I have to give so much credit to David Ellis, who also is no longer with us, but he was an amazing director, and he was a stunt guy. And we knew that David could come up with anything that could be written on the paper. David could come up with something 10 times better, just because he knew the world of stunts so well and what could be done practically. And most of that scene is done practically. I'm pretty sure the only thing we had to do CGI on was the logs hitting the ground, because they don't bounce when they hit the ground. But the way that he orchestrated that scene was brilliant. And and I'd wanted to set up the sequel where you're like, oh, it's going to be these bunch of kids, and then I wanted to kill them all off except for AJ Cook, who I adore. So yeah, it's just most of the stories that I get are about log trucks, to be honest. I realize that was a very long answer to your question, but I get so many stories about log trucks and people that don't get tans anymore. And then I'm like, well, I think I probably saved a lot of lives, so I think somebody should give me some kind of medal. It doesn't have to be a fancy medal, just some kind of medal acknowledging maybe all the lives I've saved from cancer. even though that was in the third one, so I'll give James Wong and Glenn Morgan all credit for the tanning bed. But yeah, the log truck pileups or the freeway pileups, I like to think I saved lives. Of course, in answer to, have I been interested in doing this in any other format? I mean, I worked at a studio where everything was a franchise. And of course, the franchise concept that I come up with has, death that you can't really see. So there's not a lot you can do like marketing wise. All my friends have their dolls, and I'm like, I want a doll. I want a toy. But they did have a novel series, and I know that there have been many times where people have kind of wanted to do it as a TV series or a video game. But I think, Warner Brothers is, Warner Brothers is the parent company now of New Line Cinema. I think they're very protective of the brand. And, I don't blame them. But I certainly think I would certainly love to see a TV series and a video game. I think it would be a lot of fun. But like I said, they're very protective of this particular franchise. So I'm not going to give anybody a hard time who's not just out there like trying to like be cheap whores and like pimp it out everywhere they can. So I'd rather have somebody who's protective of it. And like I said, Craig Perry in particular, and Warren Zide is produced the original ones as well, and give him and Chris Bender so much credit. My friend Mark Kaufman is the one who convinced me to make it a feature. My friend Brett Leitner, who worked at New Line, came up with the title, Final Destination. So that's what I love about movies, is it's such a process. I see so many times where somebody will want to come on and just act like it's all about them, when it really does take a village to make a movie. And I always come from a place of gratitude about everybody who I've had the chance to meet and work with, and everybody who contributes to the film. I don't think there's any bad ideas. Well, sometimes there are, but good ideas can come from anybody, is what I should say. I think good ideas can come from anybody. So yeah, it's just been great. And I think this new one, from everything I've seen, and, I've met the directors and talked to the writers, and I've seen a lot of stuff from it, and I think it's going to blow everybody's minds. I'm not just saying that. It really, everybody that's involved put a lot of love and care into this film. So, and it will be a fitting tribute to Tony Todd as well. I'm just really sad that he's gone, but just so glad that he got to be in this film, and we got to pay tribute to him in that. And now your last question goes back to the X-Files. So I was a huge X-Files fan back when I was looking to get an agent. So when they said, well, you need to write something for pick your favorite show on TV, and it was X-Files. So I knew for a spec script you needed to have kind of a cool concept, but then you also want to show that you can write the characters really well and get into the emotional stuff. So I had Scully's brother be the one that had the premonition. And so when the people started dying in these mysterious, death/suicides, he was the prime suspect. So this kind of, made Scully start to really think, like, I don't know if I can stay in the X-Files anymore. Like every time something happens, our family somehow gets pulled into it. Somebody we know is either gets killed, or somebody close to us almost dies. So it was pretty easy to fit in the procedural, because if you watch Final Destination, the movie, it's a slasher formula in a way, but death is the slasher. And instead of using an axe or a knife, it uses everyday things around you to get you. So just as you'd have of a police procedural where they're hunting down a killer, it kind of played into that. And then kind of the twist at the end of the show was that you found out that the sheriff who's been investigating the case with Scully and Mulder, you find out that he had been shot and flatlined at the same time that the plane crashed, that Flight 180 crashed. So death kind of went into him, and was using him to, like, kill these people, and he was dead. So at the end when they shot the sheriff, kind of like in the movie with Final Destination, where you see the kind of shadowy blackness go across the bathroom, like you see this kind of black shadowy thing come out of the sheriff, and you realize that death was using him to get the people that cheated it. So looking back, of course, no, I am so happy we did it as a feature film. Again, I do love the X-Files, and again, it got me an agent, got me a lot of work, so it served its purpose. But yeah, it was. I'm really glad that we went the feature route on this, because here we are 25 years later talking about it. In such a weird year, because it's the 25th anniversary of the first film. It's the 22nd anniversary of the second film. And then the new film's coming out this year in IMAX. So it is just like a Final Destination not trilogy. That's a bad word. It's just like a Final Destination, year, which is so exciting. So anyway, I hope these answers were somewhat succinct. And let me know if you have any more, but I really appreciate, like I said, I appreciate you being a fan. I appreciate everybody listening. Honestly, I always say this, but it's genuine. If it weren't for the fans, there would be no franchise of, so I think every filmmaker that I know, is always appreciative of the fans. And I know that Final Destination has some wonderful, wonderful fans, both within the horror genre, and I know a lot of you horror wicked evil people out there have gotten some of your family and friends who don't like horror movies. You've got them hooked on Final Destination. So thank you so much for that. And I think, again, you guys are going to be really, really pleased with Bloodlines. So anyway, take care. Bye-bye.
Wow, he really sounds like a lovely person, doesn't he? As he says in the interview there, he tries to remove his ego from proceedings. I guess that, like you said, comes from working for New Line, or just working for a studio and seeing so many other projects made, and kind of, I guess, the pitfalls that a creative can potentially fall into if they get too possessive over their vision. But he's clearly an incredibly gracious person, obviously, in giving us so much time and such long and well considered answers, but also just how much he includes everyone who contributed at every step of the way to making these movies and crafting this vision. And it's really interesting kind of hearing, I suppose, one of the benefits from our perspective of someone having so little ego and being such a gracious person is you get a real look at, like, a almost blow by blow of how it became what we know it as. Certainly he's got there's no impetus in him to sort of like keep it vague so that we can just assume that he came up with everything. Like, he's very good at attributing a credit where credit is due. So that was really interesting to hear. And I guess looking at both in the way that he was describing the making of Final Destination, and then his experience with Day of the Dead, like looking at how these things evolve. And for example, Scream coming out and okay, now it's got to be teens. And I think it must be fascinating coming up with a really strong core idea, but then passing that through the mesh of like, what's going to get greenlit, what's hot right now, what does this person want, what can we afford, what, et cetera, et cetera. And, being just very open-minded and flexible along the whole way, as he clearly is, has given us this iconic movie. As you said, it has entered the zeitgeist. Hadn't really thought about it as much until he voiced it, but just how stark the difference is between this film and almost every other horror franchise, in that there is no visible antagonist. You know, there's certainly films like The Shining and stuff, which are sort of standalone movies, which don't have a specific singular baddie on screen. But in terms of an ongoing franchise like Halloween or whatever, I'm not sure if I can think of another one that, as he said, it's difficult from a merchandising perspective. He doesn't have his doll. That actually came to mind when I was listening to him there. I was wondering, we can't see death, but you can maybe see death, right? Because you're writing it. So if, you know, there's obviously the classic Grim Reaper iconography, this character where there's a skeleton in a hooded cloak with a scythe, and then, you know, there's any number of visual manifestations of death in different cultures or different just artistic works. I wonder, A, having written this script originally, but B, having kind of lived with it for decades, I wonder if he's cultivated something of a visual representation of death in his head. Not necessarily even deliberately, it could just be something that is an accidental byproduct of just spending so much time thinking about death. And also, like, I guess I'm curious to know if he thinks of it as a character, because I haven't really given this much thought, but I suppose when I watched the film in the cinema when it came out, and maybe this is more a commentary on how I think of death, forgetting about Final Destination, but just in my personal life, I think of it, I don't personify it, I think of it as a force. So when I think of Final Destination, I don't think that there is a character that, you know, I know Tony Todd says you can't cheat death and all that. I never really thought about death as a singular, like, entity with personhood as much as I've thought about it as a force. It's almost like the antagonist is the universe or something. It's so beyond something that you could attribute personhood to in my head. Now, I'm not saying, I'm trying to in any way say that that's some sort of correct interpretation of it, but that's just, until he sort of started comparing it to the likes of Freddy and Jason, I never thought about, what does death look like? Because I think of it as a concept or as a force, a force in the universe rather than a character. But that's an interesting thing. And I wonder, he's mentioned that, like, the studios are quite protective of it, and that has been maybe a little conservative over the years in terms of not messing with the formula too much. They didn't want to do the one set in the Middle Ages. They didn't want to do the one with the serial killer idea. And so I presume that there hasn't been much discussion or much of a impulse to actually personify death on screen. But, you know, it sounds like in the original spec script, it was more like that, what was that old Denzel Washington movie by the guy who made Primal Fear? I forget what it was called, but it was some bad demon or the devil or something was like possessing different people. And sounds like in the X-Files script, the sheriff is not literally death, but death has taken on that person's body, and therefore we can kind of see them act out things. I wonder, has there been, because that's sort of the same with Chucky, like it's not the doll, it's the serial killer guy that's sort of possessed the doll. So I wonder if there's been much of a conversation over all of these sequels to actually get death on screen in some way, shape, or form. I love that serial killer idea. I think that sounds amazing. But also I can see how people would want to just keep getting the same thing over and over again. Thinking about like the major franchises, it feels like one of the most original. Funnily enough, another New Line 1, Nightmare on Elm Street, is also pretty original because it's like he kills you in your dreams. But most of them, they're a bit more we've seen this before. Not to speak down on them. I mean, I think a lot of the iconic horror franchises are brilliant. I'm a fan of a lot of them, but it's usually either bad guy kills a bunch of people in a vicious way, or ghosts are haunting in environment, I guess, or like some other supernatural entity, whether it's an alien or something like that. But this one, like, it's hard to think of a more unique, sort of high concept idea that's actually borne out a multi-movie horror franchise. So that's pretty cool. Maybe in Japan, but yeah, not in the West that I can think of. Yeah, I think it was interesting, kind of just hearing him track all of those changes. And the other thing I was thinking about, like, this film, don't know the timeline exactly, but this film would have come out around the time of the first Lord of the Rings. Let's have a look. Fellowship came out in 2001, and Final Destination came out in 2000. So I wonder, working at New Line, because it was not that he was just like some guy that wrote a script that sent it to New Line. That was his place of work. What was it like making a film in that environment where it's a plucky studio? The Elm Street series is kind of wound down with New Nightmare a few years previously, and you're putting together this little movie that, who knows how successful it's going to be. But meanwhile, the studio is gearing up for like one of the most ambitious undertakings in cinema history, and certainly the most ambitious undertaking in the history of that studio. I have to imagine that the Lord of the Rings franchise failing would have been disastrous to New Line. So that working within an atmosphere where I presume most of the resources and most of the attention was going in that direction, was that in any way influential to the production of Final Destination? But yeah, great comments from him, and it's lovely to hear his continued excitement about the franchise. Like, I just can't think of anyone more gracious in their kind of celebration of their own idea being taken and done with whatever future creatives decided to do. Even just the excitement that he has about that new teaser set in the tattoo parlor. It's like, it feels to me like and maybe this is why he's such a fan of the fans, is because he really feels like a genuine Final Destination fan. And yeah, that's quite refreshing. There's so many people out there who they contributed something of immense value to film history. Like they started something that we know and love today. But if you ask them about the new entries in that franchise, they're like, oh, I've got no interest in that. I wouldn't even watch that kind of thing. They've just completely sworn it off. And he's still very much excited about it. So that's really refreshing to hear.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic voice note. And you know what? It's a pleasure to listen to somebody who is not only enthusiastic and excited about movies, but just even to hear somebody talk in general that's infectious like that is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, he had a lot of interesting insight, and it is really good to hear about the collaborative process of filmmaking from so many different vantage points: screenwriting, producers, actors, and just as he said, it takes a village of people to make things happen. And in the world of auteurs and directors, it's easy to forget sometimes that there is so many talented people involved that make things happen. based on what you said about the personification of death, and did he have a question? Did he have an image of what death is in mind? I never even thought of that in a conscious way, but subconsciously, anytime that I'm thinking of death, and maybe even in the context of this movie, even though I'm not actually subconsciously imagining it, but what is in my mind is the classic Grim Reaper. But it is a great question of how somebody who's writing these scenes and imagining this character, if it is a character, like you said, I would love to know what he imagines when he was writing that character in the scenes. And do you know what else I thought, to add on to your question, is we have a very westernized view of what that is and what is occurring to the characters in this movie and what they're perhaps thinking. But I wonder what different nationalities, different cultures, different people in general are actually imagining and wondering when they're watching a movie like Final Destination based on their heritage. Obviously, Ireland's got a culture around that. Mexico has their own manifestation of what it is in their culture, and Japan obviously as well. It'd be interesting. I guess you can never really know this unless you gather people in a room from different places, but it'd be interesting to know different people's interpretation of that image and what it means when you're watching a movie like Final Destination. So yeah, it's hearing both of your thoughts around this it's got me thinking a lot.
Hey there. So wanted to answer the rest of the questions that you sent over for me. I did not ever see death with a specific visual description. Um, it started off at an X-Files script and there was no physical description there. I did have a huge argument, myself and the producers, about having a physical manifestation, because the studio could not get their heads around not having a death figure in there. So in the final treatment that I sold them before they would buy it, I did have to put like an angel of death in the script. But contrary to what you may have read online, this angel of death never actually killed any of the victims. It was more of a shadowy, shapeless figure. It didn't have a hood and a sickle, and wasn't running around killing the teenagers. It was just this shadowy figure that would appear. And actually, it didn't appear way later in the script until after the first several kids had died. And it was more taunting Alex, because he'd figured out death's design by this point, that they were dying in the order that they would have died in the plane crash. So it kind of showed up, in the shadows as this dark, undulating figure that kind of taunted Alex, to kind of wear him down. So I purposely didn't want to have a physical representation of death, which the only negative to that is we don't have a Final Destination toy. So I kind of wish we did have one. I never actually, never thought of death as a person, or, it definitely was a character. But that being a character meant that it was a force, a force that you couldn't escape. And, thinking back at my time at New Line, the Lord of the Rings didn't have any influence on Final Destination at all. I know that they were just looking for a horror project to do, and they hadn't found the right one. And I happened to connect with some producers, Craig Perry and Warren Zide, who had a first look deal at the studio, and they were really hot at the time. They'd just come off of American Pie, And, they're very smart business people, and they knew that how popular and successful horror was. So even though I worked at the studio, I wanted to kind of bring some producers on board to kind of give it more legitimacy. So it wasn't just me as an employee submitting another project to the studio. And regarding death, one of the reasons I never wanted to show a physical representation of death is I didn't want to tie it to any specific culture or religion, because death is universal. And I thought if we tied it to any specific physical form, especially something as, comedic or stereotypical as like a guy with a hood and a sickle walking around, like that would just tie it too much to like America and our stereotypical version of death. So that's why I always kept it very nebulous and kind of this just shadowy figure. And you can see remnants of that in the original film, in several scenes where you just kind of see this black kind of shadowy force moving around in the background. So that was intentional, not to give it form, because I didn't want us to limit um, people enjoying the film because we represented death in a way that didn't align with other cultures' beliefs or other religious belief systems about death. So that's why I always wanted to keep it like, you know, it was a force. If we saw anything of it, it was this kind of nebulous, like shadowy, shape in the shadows and the darkness that was haunting these kids. And yeah, and I've heard back from people, the film does really well internationally, and in a lot of countries with different cultures than ours, it does well, in Latin America and South Asia. It does well in a lot of countries and cultures where their beliefs about death are certainly different than the traditional American belief system about what death is, like a pale rider on a horse. So I think we really kind of accomplished that mission of making the film as universal as possible by not being specific about, again, giving death as kind of personification that would box it into a certain belief system. Anyway, thank you so much for your questions about the project and for being such big fans of it. Like I said, you fans mean everything to me, and everybody involved in the franchise, the whole Final Destination family is so grateful to have such wonderful fans, because we wouldn't keep making them if the fans weren't demanding them. So thank you so much, and I'm hoping that you're having the best spring ever, until May comes, and then I hope you're traumatized by a lot of new things. Take care.
Hey man, just walking into the office right now. Absolutely stunning weather. Cold because it's morning. It's April Fool's Day right now, and decided not to take the train, make a walk of it. So yeah, really, really gorgeous sunny day, and hopefully the end of the winter properly this time. Really nice to hear from your man again, and yeah, he's very gracious and generous with his time, and it's nice getting clarification on a couple of those points. Actually surprises me that Lord of the Rings had no impact whatsoever, given that it's like the biggest thing the studio had ever done. It was happening at the same time as this production, but I guess it's siloed in that way. Since we've been speaking to him, actually, news came out. I don't know if you spotted this, but Final Destination Bloodlines trailer, which we've discussed with him in the earlier voice note, has become the second most watched horror trailer of all time. And I guess it shows that even, quarter of a century after the first movie came out, there is just still something so palpable about that particular setup of like what's going to happen, and just watching that scene play out, because essentially what that teaser trailer is, it's just one of those classic Final Destination scenes in its entirety. I mean, I only watched the first sort of 30 seconds of it before I realized what it was, and I was like, okay, I'm not watching this, because I don't like watching trailers in general, but I certainly don't want to watch a trailer that's like one of the best scenes in the movie, detailed in full. But yeah, people seem to be very, very excited for this movie. So that's kind of cool. Maybe that's going to lead to some sort of like resurgence, or because I don't know, it's continually popular, but it feels like it's sort of, I don't want to say fizzled out as a franchise, but it's been a while since they've made one. And I guess if it was like completely blown up the box office, they would have just kept on making, one as often as possible. So it feels like it's kind of a bit of a comeback. I don't know. As I said, I haven't seen most of them. I am going to try and get to this. Well, not try. I will watch the second one in this year's Spooktober. And then whether I dole them out year by year annually, or I just, after watching the second one, make more of a season of it and watch them all in quick succession, I'm not sure. But definitely on board, and especially now seeing that it's coming back, kind of makes it add some incentive there. He mentioned that I think he said this previously in his first voice note, but he said that one of the drawbacks of not having a visual representation of death on screen is that, unlike the other major horror franchises, you don't get a toy. And I think if you look at someone like Freddy, or even like a more obscure character like the Jeepers Creeper or whatever, so much you can do that. You can do like a literal kind of Todd McFarlane toy, but you can also do like cute little plush versions and comics and video games. There's just a lot you can do with the character. Just posters, it really lends itself to merchandising. So, yeah, not having access to all those revenue streams, and not saying that he meant it in that particularly cynical way, but more just it's interesting for a franchise to be as big as Final Destination, and it's lacking all of those things. Like, you don't see Final Destination posters. You don't see, any sort of iconic visuals from Final Destination on the front of a poster, or like, the posters you see where it's got Chucky, it's got Jason, it's got everyone kind of lined up, illustrated or montage, but collage together or something. It's left out of that party. And as you were saying that, I thought, what would be a fun Final Destination toy set? Now, I don't think you could do this as a single toy because it wouldn't make that much sense on its own. But as a set, you could have a little toy airplane, a little toy car, a little toy roller coaster. And I think, a lot of households probably unknowingly have that Final Destination toy set because they're just, I don't know what is the catalytic like vehicle or whatever it might be in every installment in the franchise. So I'm not sure if they'd all transfer, but yeah, it would have been funny if they'd released like a special Final Destination toy airplane. Yeah, anyway, we started talking about this movie in October, and now it's May. Thank you. Because would be obviously we talked about it a while ago, and then you've gotten in touch with screenwriter, so it's ended up being a very protracted conversation. But and at this point, like, my memory of the film has sort of receded back to what it was before October. Just sort of a movie that I have a general memory and a general awareness of, but I don't remember the kind of beat to beat, moment to moment of it. But yeah, it's gone up in my esteem through talking to the writer and just like, I guess, having that more recent positive experience with it. So yeah, one that stands the test of time. And looking forward to the sequel. The sequel that came out in 2002 or something like that?
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.